The acoustic monitoring station at Site 7 recorded 11,216 individual sound events between June 1st and August 29th, 2021. I cataloged every one of them, matched 11,214 to known sources using the Cornell Bioacoustics database and three supplementary Arctic species libraries. The two I couldn't match aren't unknown. They're mine, my voice, speaking words I never said, recorded at a site I hadn't visited yet, time-stamped 9 days before I arrived in Alaska. I need to back up and explain what that means technically, because I know how it sounds. The SM4 recording units we deploy are autonomous. They're not connected to a network. They don't stream. They record to internal SD cards on a programmed schedule. In this case, 1 minute on, 4 minutes off, 24 hours a day, from the moment a technician activates them in the field. The timestamp is generated by an internal clock synced to GPS satellites at deployment. It doesn't drift, not in the way that would matter here. We're talking about a 9-day discrepancy. The units drift maybe 2 seconds per month. I've tested it. I've had the manufacturer confirm it. So what I'm telling you is that a recording device sealed in a waterproof housing bolted to a conduit post in a drainage north of the Noatak River captured my voice on May 23rd, 2021, saying something I don't remember saying in a place I physically could not have been. I was in Fairbanks on May 23rd. I have the hotel receipt. I have the rental car mileage log. I have a selfie my girlfriend took of me at a restaurant on College Road that evening. I was 400 miles south, eating halibut tacos while a microphone in the western Brooks Range recorded me describing terrain features I wouldn't see for another 9 days. That's the part that should bother you, not just that it's my voice, that the words are accurate. I've been a wildlife acoustics technician for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for 7 years. Before that, I did 2 seasons with the Park Service in Denali running bat monitoring arrays, and a season with a consulting firm in the Yukon doing owl surveys. I have a master's in ecology from University of Montana. My thesis was on boreal owl vocal variation across latitudinal gradients. I mention this not because credentials matter in what I'm about to describe, but because I need you to understand that sound identification is the thing I'm best at in the world. It's the skill that defines my professional life. When I tell you I analyzed a recording and confirmed it was my own voice, I'm not guessing. I ran it through spectrographic comparison. I matched the formant frequencies. I compared it against 7 hours of dictation recordings I made during that same field season. The probability of a false match at that resolution is less than 1 in 400,000. The project was a baseline acoustic biodiversity survey for the Noatak National Preserve. Fish and Wildlife had partnered with the Park Service to establish monitoring stations across 12 sites in the western Brooks Range, each one positioned to capture a representative sample of the local soundscape. Breeding birds, marine mammal vocalizations carrying inland from the coast, insect activity, weather events, aircraft overflights, and anything else the microphones picked up. The idea was simple: record everything for one full summer, catalog it, build a species presence database, and use it as a reference point for future climate monitoring. If bird species shift their range north over the next 50 years, the 2021 recordings would show what was there before. I was assigned the Western Cluster, Sites 5 through 8, 4 stations spread across roughly 110 miles of the Noatak drainage and its tributaries, all of them above the tree line or at its margin, all of them remote enough that the nearest road was the Dalton Highway, which might as well have been on another planet. Access was by bush plane, or, for the 2 lower sites, by pack rafts down the Noatak from a gravel strip near the headwaters. I'd done field work in the Brooks Range twice before, once for a shorebird survey out of Umiat, once for the owl project in the Eastern Range near Wiseman. I knew the country. Not this specific country, but the type. Open tundra above, willows in the drainages, permafrost underfoot, turning everything into a sponge by late June, weather that could go from 60 degrees and sunny to 34 and horizontal sleet in the time it took to eat a granola bar. I was comfortable there. I want to be clear about that. The Brooks Range wasn't a place that frightened me. It was the landscape I'd chosen repeatedly as the place I wanted to work. My supervisor on the project was Dr. Ann Harker, based at the regional office in Anchorage. She designed the monitoring protocol and secured the funding. I'd worked with her on one previous project, a soundscape analysis of the Arctic refuge coastal plain, and she'd specifically requested me for the Noatak work because she trusted my fieldwork and my analysis. The plan was straightforward. I'd fly in the first week of June, deploy fresh SD cards at all 4 stations, verify equipment function, record GPS coordinates and habitat condition at each site, then return in late August for retrieval. In between, the stations ran themselves. I had other work that summer, an office-based analysis project in Fairbanks, plus a short stint helping with a spotted seal survey on the Seward Peninsula. The Noatak sites were supposed to be 2 field trips, 4 days each, in and out. The charter company was Kotzebue Air, operating out of Kotzebue on the coast. I'd used them before. Reliable. Their pilot for my trips was a guy named Dale Wicks, maybe 60 years old, who'd been flying the Western Brooks Range since before I was born. He knew every gravel bar, every emergency strip, every drainage. We flew a de Havilland Beaver on floats, which limited us to sites with lakes or slow river stretches long enough to land on. Sites 5 and 6 were accessible by lake. Site 8 was on the Noatak itself, a long, slow stretch below a set of bluffs. Site 7 was the problem child. No lake, no suitable river stretch within walking distance. For Site 7, Dale would drop me on a lake about 4 miles south, and I'd hike in with my field pack, do the work, camp overnight, and hike out the next morning for pickup. I flew out of Kotzebue on June 1st. Clear day. Winds under 10 knots. The kind of day the Brooks Range gives you maybe 15 times a summer, where you can see 100 miles in every direction, and the tundra looks like it was painted that morning. We hit sites 5 and 6 first. Straightforward. I swapped SD cards, checked the solar panel connections and battery voltage on each unit, photographed the housing for the condition report, recorded GPS coordinates, logged the habitat description. Both stations were functioning perfectly. The audio data from the deployment checks sounded clean. No water intrusion, no microphone damage from winter ice. Dale and I ate sandwiches on the float of the Beaver at Site 6's lake while he told me about a hunting camp he'd spotted from the air a few days earlier. Some guys from Anchorage who'd set up in a drainage that flooded every year. They'll learn or They'll swim, he said. I liked Dale. He had the specific quiet competence of people who'd spent decades in a place that didn't tolerate incompetence. Site 8 went the same way. We landed on the Noatak in the early afternoon, the river running clear and cold and about 3 feet deep at the margins. I waded to the bank, hiked 20 minutes up a bench to the station, swapped the card, ran the checks. Everything nominal. I logged it and hiked back. Then we flew to the lake near Site 7. Dale would wait overnight. He had a camp setup he kept in the back of the Beaver, a sleeping bag and pad he'd roll out on the floor of the cargo area. He'd done it 1,000 times. I loaded my pack, overnight kit, food for 2 meals, the field equipment, a bare canister, my Garmin inReach, a satellite phone as backup, and the spare SD cards. Pack weight was about 42 pounds. I checked my GPS, confirmed the waypoint for Site 7, and started walking. 4 miles on Arctic tundra is not 4 miles on a trail. The ground was tussock, head-sized clumps of cotton grass with ankle-deep water between them. You either step on the tussocks and risk rolling an ankle, or you step between them and get wet feet. I stepped on the tussocks and rolled my ankle twice in the first mile, neither time badly. The route climbed gradually from the lake at about 1,800 feet to a low saddle at 2,200 feet, then dropped into a north-facing drainage where Site 7 was positioned. From the saddle, I could see the drainage spreading out below me, willows lining the creek, tundra benches on either side rising to rocky ridges, a few persistent snowfields on the north-facing slopes, even in early June. No trees, nothing taller than waist-height willow. The light was that long Arctic evening light, golden and horizontal, making every rock and hummock throw a shadow twice its height. I descended into the drainage and found the station. The housing was intact. A green ammunition can, modified with cable glands, bolted to a galvanized conduit post that we'd driven into the permafrost the previous summer. I opened it up. The SM4 unit inside was dry, LED showing standby mode, battery voltage at 11.2 volts, within range. Solar panel connections clean. I pulled the SD card from the fall deployment, sealed it in a labeled bag, inserted the fresh card, activated the unit, confirmed recording function with a clap test. 3 sharp hand claps in front of the microphone, verifiable on the recording as a timestamp marker, and logged everything in my field notebook. Date, time, GPS coordinates, battery voltage, card serial number, habitat condition notes. I took 6 photographs of the station and surrounding landscape. Then I set up my tent on a flat patch of tundra about 200 yards from the station, cooked a freeze-dried meal on my Jetboil, and sat on my sleeping pad watching the drainage. It was maybe 10 p.m. by then, still full light. The sun would dip to the horizon around 1 a.m. and come right back up. A pair of long-tailed Jaegers were hunting the tundra upslope, diving and pulling up, sharp-winged silhouettes against the sky. I could hear the creak from the drainage bottom, a steady sound like static. A golden plover was calling from somewhere on the bench to my east, that 2-note whistle that sounds like it's asking a question it already knows the answer to. I logged the species in my notebook. Pluvialis dominica, breeding habitat confirmed. I slept a few hours. Packed out the next morning, met Dale at the lake by 9, and we flew back to Kotzebue. I shipped the SD cards to the Fairbanks office by priority mail, where they'd sit in a climate-controlled cabinet until August when I'd begin the analysis. Standard procedure. Nothing about the trip was unusual. I wrote the field report on the flight back, submitted it to Anne by email that evening, and moved on to the next project. I didn't touch the no attack data until September. The analysis protocol was methodical. Each SD card held roughly 90 days of intermittent recordings, 1 minute on, 4 minutes off, which came to about 26,000 individual 1 minute files per station. Step 1 was automated screening. Software scanned every file, flagged anything above ambient noise thresholds, and classified it by broad category: biotic, abiotic, anthropogenic. Step 2 was manual review of everything the software flagged as biotic. I'd listen, examine the spectrogram, and assign a species ID or mark it as unidentifiable. Step 3 was cross-referencing against the Cornell database and the supplementary Arctic libraries to confirm IDs and catch anything the software missed. It took me 3 weeks to get through sites 5, 6, and 8. The data was clean, the species lists predictable: Lapland longspurs, snow buntings, red-throated loons on the lakes, a few rough-legged hawks, Arctic ground squirrel alarm calls, the occasional distant fixed-wing aircraft. Good baseline data, exactly what we needed. I started Site 7 on October 4th. The automated screening flagged 11,216 events across the summer. I began working through them chronologically, starting with the earliest files from the previous fall's deployment, October, November, December of 2020, when the station was recording through the Arctic winter, mostly wind, some fox vocalizations in November, a wolverine in February. That was a nice record, uncommon in the acoustic data. The spring files were more active. Snow buntings arrived in late April, Lapland longspurs by early May. The soundscape filled in the way it always does in the Arctic, thin and sparse, and then suddenly populous. May 23rd, file timestamp 1447, Alaska Daylight Time. The automated screening had flagged it as anthropogenic. Human voice. I assumed it was a pilot, maybe Dale overflying the area on a charter or a sport hunter passing through early. I clicked play. It was me, not someone who sounded like me. Me. My cadence, my specific pronunciation, the way I drop the G on present participles when I'm tired, the faint nasality from a deviated septum I've had since I broke my nose playing hockey in high school. I was describing terrain. Specifically, I was describing the drainage where Site 7 was located, the willows, the snowfields on the north-facing slopes, the creek. I was dictating what sounded like a field observation, the same kind of voice notes I make on every site visit when my hands are full or my notebook is in my pack. Except I wasn't there on May 23rd. The recording was 43 seconds long. The SM4 captured the tail end of whatever I was saying. The file starts mid-sentence, and then the full minute runs out and the unit goes back to standby. In the 43 seconds of speech, I describe the drainage, mention the snow level on the north slopes, reference a second bench on the east side, and say the word displacement once, in a context I can't fully parse because the sentence is cut off. The audio quality is consistent with someone speaking from approximately the same distance as the microphone clap test I performed on June 1st, meaning whoever spoke was standing at or near the station. I sat in my office chair in Fairbanks, staring at the spectrogram for a long time. Then I did what I do with any anomalous recording. I documented it. I logged the timestamp, the file name, the duration, the content. I ran the spectrographic analysis. I pulled my own voice samples from dictation recordings I'd made on June 1st, the same field season, the same equipment, and compared formant patterns, pitch range, speech rate. The match was unambiguous. Then I checked my records for May 23rd. Hotel receipt in Fairbanks, Bridgewater Hotel, checked in May 21st, checked out May 25th. Rental car from Avis, a white Chevy Silverado, odometer log showing local driving only. My InReach track data for that week showed me in Fairbanks, the selfie at College Road. I called my girlfriend, we were still together then, and asked her what we'd done on the 23rd. She said we'd gone to the University Museum in the morning and dinner in the evening. She remembered because it rained and the museum was indoors, and she'd wanted to hike 400 miles from the drainage. Time stamped, corroborated, documented. I flagged the file in the database and kept working. Professional discipline. You don't stop an analysis because of one anomaly. You document it and continue because the context of surrounding data might explain it. 312 files later, I found the second one, July 11th. Timestamp 214 ADT, middle of the Arctic night, which in July isn't night at all. Full daylight, sun low, but above the horizon. The automated screening had flagged this one as biotic, not anthropogenic. The software categorized it as a possible mammal vocalization. I opened the spectrogram and saw immediately why the software was confused. The frequency range was wrong for a pure voice classification. The fundamental was lower than typical human speech, hovering around 70 hertz, and the harmonic structure was compressed in a way I'd never seen. But within that envelope, layered into it like a watermark in paper, was speech. My speech. The same voice, saying different words. This recording was a full 60 seconds. The entire capture window. The voice was continuous through it, which meant whoever was speaking had been going for at least a minute before the recorder cycled on and continued after it cycled off. The content was harder to parse because of the spectral compression. The voice was there, but it was embedded in something else, a carrier frequency, a sound that the software tried to classify as biological because its harmonic structure resembled a living system, overtones building on overtones in a pattern that looked organic on the spectrogram, like a whale call almost, but not any whale call in any database I had access to. I spent 2 full days on this file. I isolated the voice component using bandpass filters and spectral subtraction. What emerged was me, again, speaking in the same dictation cadence, but this time describing something I couldn't identify. References to the signal and station offset, and something that sounded like propagation window. Technical language, but not language I use, not terminology for my field. It sounded like, and I say this knowing how it sounded like me speaking with knowledge I don't have. On July 11th, I was in Nome. Seward Peninsula spotted seal survey, 800 miles west. I have the field reports, the crew logs, the GPS tracks. I was counting seals on a beach transect at 2:14 a.m. on July 11th because it was the Arctic and the sun was up, and we worked when conditions were good. I called Anne the next day. I told her about the anomalous files, kept it professional, framed it as a data integrity question. Could someone have accessed the site between deployment periods? Could a technician's voice have been somehow imprinted on the card from a previous use? She was quiet for a moment and then asked me to send her the files. I did. She acknowledged receipt and said she'd look into it. 3 days later, she called back and asked me to come to Anchorage. I flew down on October 14th. Anne met me at the regional office on C Street. She had a conference room booked, the door closed, and a laptop open on the table. She didn't waste time. She told me that the SM4 at Site 7 was not the first acoustic monitoring device to record anomalous audio in that drainage. In 2014, a different project, a long-term soundscape monitoring effort run by the Park Service, had deployed a recording unit approximately 600 meters upstream from where our station was positioned. That unit had operated for 2 years. The technician who retrieved it and processed the data had flagged 3 files containing what he described in his analysis notes as an unidentified bioacoustic events with anthropogenic spectral characteristics. He couldn't match them to any known species. He noted the anomaly in his report. The report went into the Park Service database, and no one followed up. Anne had pulled those files. She played them for me. The voice in the 2014 recordings was not mine. It was a man's voice, older, with what sounded like a Midwestern accent. The same embedded quality, speech layered into a carrier frequency with that compressed harmonic structure. The spectral signature of the carrier was identical to what I'd found in my July 11th file. Same fundamental frequency, same overtone pattern, same organic looking harmonic envelope. The technician who processed the 2014 data was named Robert Keynes. He'd worked for the Park Service for 11 years. Anne told me he resigned in 2016, about a year after submitting the analysis. She'd tried to contact him for this meeting. The phone number on file was disconnected. His forwarding address was a P.O. box in Bozeman that had been closed. I asked Anne what she thought was going on. She didn't answer the question. Instead, she opened a second set of files on the laptop. These were from a completely different source, a seismic monitoring station operated by the Alaska Earthquake Center, positioned about 12 miles east of Site 7. Seismic stations record ground vibration, not air pressure like microphones, but they sometimes pick up acoustic events that couple through the ground surface. Anne had requested the raw data from this station for the period matching my anomalous recordings. On both dates, May 23rd and July 11th, the seismic station recorded low-frequency ground-coupled acoustic events. The spectrograms of those seismic signals, when converted to the audible range, showed the same harmonic pattern, the same carrier frequency. No voice component. The ground coupling would strip that out. But the structural signature was unmistakable. Whatever produced that sound, it wasn't localized to the air column around my microphone. It was propagating through the ground for at least 12 miles. Anne had one more thing to show me. She pulled up a map, a standard USGS topographic quad for the area around Site 7. She'd overlaid the locations of every acoustic monitoring station, seismic station, and weather station within a 60-mile radius. Then she highlighted the ones that had recorded unexplained data events in the last 10 years. There were 9, spread across the drainage and its tributaries, from the headwaters down to where the Noatak widened and turned south. 9 instruments, different agencies, Fish and Wildlife, Park Service, USGS, one university research station, different purposes, different deployment years. All of them had at some point recorded events that didn't match their respective databases. None of the 9 projects had been aware of each other's anomalies. Anne had assembled this only because my report prompted her to search. I asked her the question that had been building since she played the 2014 recordings. What's making the sound? She told me she had a theory, but needed ground truth. She asked if I was willing to return to Site 7 before winter closed in. A rapid deployment, fly in, spend 3 to 4 days on site with enhanced monitoring equipment, collect data, fly out. She said she could authorize the travel and field pay within the week. I should have said no. I recognize that now. But you have to understand, I was an acoustic scientist looking at data that didn't fit any framework I'd ever encountered. The carrier frequency alone was publishable. The spectral signature was unlike anything in the literature, and the voice, my voice, recorded in a place I hadn't been. I wanted to understand it the way you want to breathe. I said yes. We deployed on October 22nd, late in the season for the Brooks Range. The tundra was brown and frozen, termination dust on the higher peaks, the creeks iced at the margins. Dale flew me in on a clear morning with the temperature at 14 degrees. The lake near Site 7 was still open, barely. He gave me a look when I told him I'd be camping for 4 nights. "It's October up here," he said. I told him I had the gear. He said he'd be back on the 26th morning, and if the lake froze, he'd land on wheels, on the gravel bar 2 miles north, and I should plan accordingly. I hiked to the site with 61 pounds on my back. The dussocks were frozen solid now, actually easier to walk on than in summer, the ground firm under each step. My breath hung in the air. The drainage was quiet in a way that June hadn't been. No bird song, no insect hum. Just whined over tundra and the muted sound of the creek under its ice shell. The monitoring station was exactly as I'd left it. I checked the SM4, operational, recording on schedule, battery voltage strong with the solar panel charging during the short October daylight. I pulled the SD card that had been recording since June and pocketed it. Then I deployed the additional equipment Anne had authorized, a second SM4 on a separate post 30 meters from the original, a low-frequency microphone designed for infrasound detection, and a ground-coupled geophone, essentially a seismometer, sensitive enough to detect the kind of events the Earthquake Center station had picked up. I set up my camp on the same flat spot I'd used in June, 4-season tent rated to -20. I organized my gear, charged my inReach, and established a communication scheduled with Anne. Check-in at 800 and 2000 daily. First check-in, I reported deployment complete, weather clear, temperature 8 degrees and falling. She acknowledged and told me to run a continuous recording protocol on all instruments. No duty cycling. Capture everything. The first 2 days were uneventful in the way that only Arctic fieldwork can be uneventful. Hours of checking instruments, downloading data to a field laptop, running preliminary spectrograms, walking the drainage to take GPS waypoints and habitat photographs. The days were getting short, 8 hours of usable light. I worked during daylight and spent the dark hours in my tent reviewing data on the laptop. The recordings were clean: wind, creek, a raven on the first morning, a fox at dusk on the second day, It's yipping coming from somewhere on the East Ridge. I logged everything. On the evening of the second day, I reviewed the full data set from the SD card I'd pulled, the one that had been recording since June 1st. I was looking for more anomalous files. I found them. 14 additional events matching the carrier frequency signature spread across the summer. They'd passed the automated screening as wind noise or been flagged as unidentified biotic events. Without specifically looking for the embedded speech, the software had no reason to separate them from ambient sound. Most of the 14 contained the carrier frequency alone, that pulsing, harmonic, organic sounding hum, without a detectable voice component, but 3 of them had voice. My voice again. The same dictation cadence, the same measured professional tone, describing things I could not assess because the spectral compression made full transcription impossible. I caught fragments. Bearing 273, the 4th terrace, seasonal offset, phrases that meant nothing to me. I reported this to Anne at the evening check-in. Satellite phone, not radio. We were beyond any repeater range. She was quiet for a long time, then asked if I'd noticed anything personally, any sound, any vibration, anything physical. I told her I hadn't. The drainage was quiet. She told me to continue the protocol and asked me to add a specific procedure. At midnight each night, I should stand at the primary monitoring station and make a 3-minute voice recording on my own handheld device, describing the current conditions, a controlled sample. If the station was capturing my voice from some kind of temporal displacement, she wanted to see if it would record me in real time and later match it to a future anomalous file. This should have been the moment I fully grasped what Anne was suggesting, that the voice on the recordings wasn't a contamination or an artifact, but a temporal anomaly. My voice from a time I hadn't experienced yet, or a version of these observations made under conditions I hadn't yet encountered. But I was thinking like a technician, not a theorist. I followed the procedure. At midnight on October 24th, I stood at the station in 10-degree air, headlamp off, and recorded myself describing the drainage under a sky so dense with stars that the Milky Way cast a faint shadow. I described the temperature, the wind direction, the ice on the creek, the silence. At 3:47 a.m., the geophone triggered. I'd set it to alert my field laptop when ground vibration exceeded a threshold well above anything wind or animal movement would produce. The alert woke me. I opened the laptop in my sleeping bag and pulled up the geophone trace. A sustained low-frequency vibration, fundamental at 68 Hz, with overtones at 136, 204, and 272, a clean harmonic series. It had begun at 3:41 and was ongoing. Duration already 6 minutes. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The air was still. No wind. The stars were unchanged. The creek made its muffled sound beneath the ice. I stood there for perhaps 30 seconds, listening, and heard nothing. The frequency was below the threshold of human hearing at the amplitude the geophone was registering. Whatever was vibrating the ground beneath my feet was doing so at a level I could measure but not perceive. Then the SM4 units triggered, both of them simultaneously. I checked the laptop. The airborne microphones were picking up something, a faint signal just above the noise floor, centered at 70 Hz, the same carrier frequency from the archival recordings. It was happening in real time, and I was standing in it. I grabbed my handheld recorder and held it out at arm's length, pressing record. I didn't speak. I just let it capture whatever was in the air. The signal persisted for another 12 minutes. The geophone trace shows it ending at 3:59, an 18-minute event. Clean start, clean stop. No taper. It didn't fade in or fade out. It began as if switched on, and it ended the same way. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in my tent with a laptop and the headphones and listened to what the SM4 had captured. At normal playback, it was barely audible. A low hum at the edge of perception felt more than heard. But when I applied the same spectral processing I'd used on the archival files, bandpass filtering, harmonic isolation, amplitude normalization, something emerged from the carrier. Not a voice this time, a pattern, a rhythmic modulation of the carrier frequency, a pulse structure with intervals that weren't regular but weren't random either. I stared at the spectrogram. The pattern repeated approximately every 4 minutes, but each repetition was slightly different. The same structure with variations, like a phrase spoken with different emphasis each time. The harmonic overtones shifted with each repetition, the upper partials moving in sequences that I could only describe as, and I'm choosing this word carefully, organized, not chaotic, not mechanical, organized the way a living vocalization is organized, with variability constrained within a structure. I ran the pattern through every analysis tool I had on the field laptop. I compared it against marine mammal vocalizations, which have the most complex acoustic structures in the biological world. Humpback whale song, sperm whale codas, bowhead whale calls. There were superficial similarities in the harmonic layering, but nothing that matched the actual pattern structure. I compared it against geological acoustic phenomena, volcanic tremor, glacial calving, icequake signals. Again, nothing. The signal occupied a space in my analytical framework that was genuinely empty. I reported everything to Anne at the 8 o'clock check-in. I was clinical. I described the geophone trigger, the simultaneous airborne detection, the signal characteristics, the pattern structure. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked one question. Did it respond to your midnight recording? I hadn't thought to check. I opened the SM4 data from midnight when I'd stood at the station and made my 3-minute descriptive recording per her protocol. I scrolled forward in the timeline. My voice was there at midnight, clear and normal, describing the stars and the temperature and the silence. The file ended. The next recording cycle began. Normal ambient sound. The next. Normal. The next. At 0:16, 16 minutes after I'd finished my recording, the carrier frequency appeared. Faint. A brief pulse. Maybe 8 seconds. Then it stopped. It didn't resume until the main event at 3:41. 16 minutes after I spoke, something answered. Anne told me to pack out a day early. I protested. We still had data to collect, and the geophone was in place, and the conditions were stable. She overrode me. She said Dale would be at the lake the next morning, and I should be there. Her voice had changed. Not frightened. Anne didn't operate on that register, but deliberate. Each word placed with the precision of someone who has realized the scope of a problem exceeds the resources deployed against it. I spent October 25th packing out equipment in a state of professional dissociation. I worked methodically, retrieved the geophone, the infrasound mic, the second SM4. I pulled the SD cards from both recorders. I photographed everything. I took GPS waypoints at all instrument locations. I packed it all into my bag, broke camp, and hiked out to the lake. The tussocks crunched under my boots, frozen solid. The drainage behind me was perfectly silent. No ravens, no fox, just the wind crossing the tundra with nothing to break it for 200 miles. Dale was there at 8 the next morning. The lake had skim ice around the edges. He landed long and fast, the floats cutting through it with a sound like breaking glass. I loaded my gear in silence. He asked how it went, and I said fine. He looked at me the way people look at you when they know fine isn't the word you mean. The flight back to Kotzebue was clear and smooth, and I watched the drainage fall away beneath us. That long, dark crease in the tundra running north. The creek, a thread of white ice. The benches rising on either side to the ridges. From the air, it looked like any other Arctic drainage. Thousands of them in the Brooks Range, all shaped by the same processes over the same millennia. Nothing to mark this one as different. The meeting in Anchorage happened on November 3rd. This time, it wasn't just Anne. There were 4 others in the conference room, 2 from the Park Service Regional Science Office, 1 from the USGS Alaska Science Center, and a woman introduced only as Dr. Liang, who Anne said was from the program. No one clarified which program. Dr. Liang had clearance materials that I wasn't shown. She sat at the end of the table and watched me for 2 hours while I presented my data. I walked them through everything: the archival anomalies, the voice matches, the carrier frequency, the real-time event, the responsive pulse after my midnight recording, the organized pattern structure. I had spectrograms projected on the wall, waveforms on printouts, statistical analyses of the formant comparisons. I was thorough because thorough is the only thing I know how to be. When I finished, Dr. Liang asked me a question that restructured everything I'd understood about the project. When Dr. Harker asked you to make the midnight voice recordings, did she tell you why she specified that particular protocol? I said no. Anne had framed it as a controlled sample for comparison. Dr. Liang nodded. The protocol comes from a 2009 paper out of Woods Hole, classified. It describes a method for establishing acoustic contact with subcrustal biological signal sources. The midnight recording wasn't a control sample. It was a call. I looked at Anne. She didn't look away, but she didn't confirm or deny it either. She had the expression of someone who has been managing information flow and has just watched a wall come down. Dr. Liang continued. She told me that the drainage where Site 7 was located had been under intermittent monitoring by a multi-agency working group since 2006. The first anomalous recordings predated the Park Service's 2014 deployment. They went back to a USGS geophone array installed for permafrost research. The ground-coupled signals had been detected, analyzed, and filed under a classification I didn't have access to. The 9 anomalous instruments Anne had mapped for me were not coincidental discoveries. They were the ones that had slipped through the classification net. The actual number of instruments that had recorded the signal was higher. She didn't say how much higher. The working group's operating theory, and she stressed that it was a theory, not a conclusion, was that the carrier frequency originated from a biological system operating at depth within the permafrost or sub-permafrost geology, not a known organism, not a known geological process, a signal source that exhibited organized acoustic behavior, responded to surface level sounds, and had been active in the drainage for at least 15 years of confirmed monitoring, possibly much longer. The Inupiat communities in the region had oral references to the drainage that the working group's ethnographic consultant had flagged as potentially relevant, but Dr. Liang didn't elaborate on those. The voice was the part they couldn't explain. The carrier frequency, the ground coupling, the organized patterns, those could be fit, with effort, into a framework of unknown but potentially natural phenomena. But a signal source that embeds human speech, specific, identifiable human speech, into its acoustic output defied any model they had. My voice, describing terrain I hadn't visited yet, using terminology I didn't use, time-stamped days before my arrival. Robert Keynes's voice in 2014, a man who'd processed the data and then disappeared from the professional landscape entirely. The working group had a term for it that I heard Dr. Liang use once, almost casually: anticipatory echo, as if the signal was reflecting back something that hadn't happened yet, or something that would happen in a version of events slightly offset from the one I'd experienced. I asked why they'd sent me to the site in October if they knew the signal was there. Dr. Liang deferred to Anne. Anne said the midnight recording protocol had been designed to test whether the signal was responsive to specific individuals, whether it would embed the voice of whoever was present or only voices it had previously captured. My October deployment was, in a sense, an experiment. They needed to know if the signal would interact with me in real time. It had. 16 minutes after I spoke, it answered. I sat in that conference room and felt something I'd never experienced in my professional life. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the sensation of realizing that the framework you've built your career inside, the framework of identifiable sounds, catalogable species, measurable phenomena, has an edge, and you've been standing on it for months without knowing. I asked what happened to Robert Keynes. Dr. Liang said she couldn't discuss other personnel. Anne looked at the table. The debriefing lasted another hour. I signed documents, 3 of them, non-disclosure language embedded in what was framed as a standard data handling agreement. The Site 7 data was reclassified from my project into whatever the working group system was. My acoustic biodiversity report for the no attack would include Sites 5, 6, and 8 only. Site 7 was removed from my deliverables. Anne apologized for this in a way that told me she'd argued against it and lost. I went back to Fairbanks. I finished the analysis for the remaining 3 sites. I submitted the report. I did not include Site 7 in the species list, the soundscape characterization, or the baseline database. As far as the official record of the No Attack Acoustic Survey is concerned, Site 7 doesn't exist, but I'd already copied the files, not the October data. That was on SD cards I'd handed over in Anchorage, but the summer data, the original card I'd pulled on June 1st and shipped to Fairbanks before any of this started. I'd processed it on my work computer, and the working files were still on my laptop when I backed it up to a personal drive in September. Standard practice for anyone who's ever worried about a hard drive failure. I wasn't thinking about classification at the time. I was just being careful with the data. I listened to those files in the months that followed, not obsessively, periodically, late at night in my apartment in Fairbanks with good headphones, running the spectrograms on my personal laptop. I isolated all 14 carrier frequency events from the summer data and cataloged them. Durations range from 8 seconds to 22 minutes. The longest ones had the most complex internal structure, multiple layered patterns running simultaneously, overtone sequences that shifted and modulated with a complexity I still cannot quantify. The three that contained my voice were scattered through the summer, May, July, August. Each time, my voice described something specific to the drainage, using language and detail that suggested direct observation, as if I'd been standing there, looking at the terrain, narrating what I saw. I checked my locations for each date. Every time, I was hundreds of miles away. I left the Fish and Wildlife Service in March 2022. Officially, I took a position with a private environmental consulting firm in Bozeman. Better pay, less travel. Those things were true, but the actual reason was that I could no longer listen to recordings without running carrier frequency analysis first. I could no longer hear an ambiguous sound in any acoustic data set without wondering if there was speech embedded in it. The fundamental tool of my profession, my ear, my ability to listen to a landscape and know what's in it, had been compromised, not damaged, altered. I heard things differently now. I listened for things that shouldn't be there. My girlfriend and I broke up in January 2022. She said I'd become distant. She was right. I was distant. I was 400 miles and 9 days away from myself, standing in a drainage I'd never visited, describing terrain I somehow knew. The consulting job is fine. I do wetland delineation surveys and environmental impact assessments. The acoustics work is minimal, occasional bat surveys using automated detectors. I don't process the data myself. I send it to a subcontractor. Anne emails me every few months, professional check-ins that never mention the no attack directly. She tells me about project funding, new hires, species records from other parts of the state. I read between the lines. When she mentions ongoing monitoring commitments in the Western Brooks Range, I know what she means. The working group is still operating. The instruments are still recording. Last month, May 2026, I received a package at my office in Bozeman. No return address. Inside was a USB drive and a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. Site 7, April 2026. You should hear this. The handwriting was not Anne's. I don't recognize it. I plugged in the drive. One file, an SM4 recording, metadata intact. Timestamp, April 9th, 2026, 11:32 ADT. Location tag matching Site 7's coordinates. I opened the spectrogram. The carrier frequency was there, stronger than anything in my 2021 data. The amplitude was an order of magnitude higher. The harmonic structure had changed too. The overtone series extended higher. The pattern modulation faster and more complex, and embedded in it clear enough that I could hear it without filtering, without spectral processing, without any of the tools I'd normally need. A voice, mine, describing this. What I'm telling you now. The meeting in Anchorage, the documents I signed, the files I copied, the apartment in Fairbanks, the breakup. Describing it in the past tense, the way you describe something you've already lived through, the way I'm describing it right now. The recording is from April. I hadn't told anyone these details in April. I hadn't told anyone these details ever. The words on the recording match what I've said here, not approximately, not in summary, but specifically in phrasing. I only arrived at as I spoke them just now. The recording predates this conversation by 7 weeks. The USB drive is in my desk drawer. I've listened to it 4 times. Each time, the part of the recording that matches what I've already said is a little longer, as if the file is updating. But it's on a USB drive. It can't update. I've verified the file hash. It hasn't changed. The file hash hasn't changed, but the content has. I don't have an explanation for that. I don't have an explanation for any of it. I just have the data, and the data says that something under the permafrost in a drainage north of the Noatak River has been listening to the surface for at least 15 years, and it learned my voice, and it knows what I'm going to say before I say it, and the gap between when it knows and when I speak is getting smaller. The consulting firm just won a contract, Acoustic Bat, monitoring for a wind energy project. The site is in Montana, 2,000 miles from the Brooks Range. The automated detectors arrived in the mail yesterday. I opened one of the boxes to check the equipment. Standard SM4 unit, same model I used in Alaska. I powered it on, ran a test recording, played it back. 60 seconds of ambient office noise, my computer fan, the ventilation system, traffic outside, and under all of it, right at the noise floor, so faint I might be imagining it, except I have the spectrogram and I'm not imagining it. A pulse, 70 hertz, clean harmonic series, 8 seconds long. I'm 2,000 miles from the drainage. The signal is in my office. I don't think the drainage matters anymore. I think the drainage was just where we first heard it. I think it's been here the whole time, everywhere, just below the threshold. And what happened in the Brooks Range is that something made it loud enough for our instruments to catch. And now that it's caught, now that it has a voice to work with, it doesn't need the drainage. It just needs a microphone. My bat detectors deploy next week. 12 units across 40 square miles of Montana grassland, each one recording continuously for 6 months. I'll process the data in November. I already know what I'll find.